On this program, we're going to be having a conversation with Dave Fox. He's a full-time professor at Greensboro College and has been for over 20 years. He's taught many courses, including piano studies, piano proficiency, music fundamentals, music theory, and music appreciation. He has done a number of collaborations over the years, including the Dave Fox Group, the Foxborn Chronicles, and the Healing Blues Project. You might catch him around town playing at places like the O. Henry Hotel at Thursday nights where he performs jazz. Longtime friend, musician, and jazz legend Wally West had this to say about him. Dave is a multifaceted player who is adept in many styles of music, whether it be classical, jazz, avant-garde, contemporary, or whatever. Dave has each musical dialect down that properly represents each genre or style. He is an incredibly creative player, and regardless of playing solo or an ensemble setting, hearing him is always a treat. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's have a conversation with Dave Fox.
Well, I was born in Winston-Salem and lived there for 6 years. And then we moved to New Jersey, where I lived for 4 years. And then to El Paso, Texas for 8 months. We went there because you had to go there. My dad worked for Western Electric, and you had to go to El Paso first to go to the next place, which is an island in the Pacific Ocean called Kwajalein. And they had Army people out there, and my dad was in defense with Western Electric. So you get to, it's a nice little place to live. It's like 9 degrees above the equator, so it's always hot. And there's ocean, it's only 2 miles long, so it's like living in the tropics. It is living in the tropics. And you don't have to pay any any federal income tax while you're there too. So it was a good thing for my dad to get to go out to Kwajalein. And then when we came back from there, we moved to Greensboro, where I've lived ever since. So I've been here since I was in junior high school. I listened to the Beatles. I was listening to all the great rock music and soul music that was on the radio at that time. I listened to The Who a lot. I didn't start listening to jazz until a couple years later, till I was in high school, and I played in a stage band at Dudley with Arthur Wise. And we had a really good pianist who was student teaching at that time. His name was Bruce Thomas, and he's now a teacher at Berkeley in composition, who I listened to him play. He would sit down at the piano sometimes and just improvise and play, and it was the first time I'd ever really heard anybody do that. And then everyone then started listening to Chick Corea, who was kind of a crossover rock jazz artist, and so that got me interested into listening to more and more jazz. So by the time I graduated from high school, I still liked rock music, but I was more into jazz, I think I would say, and actually more into classical at that time, because I had kind of rekindled my love for classical music. I took piano lessons when we lived in New Jersey, so I was about seven or 8 years old, but then stopped because I just got interested in other things in school. Believe it or not, football, which I'm terrible at. I was never on the team, but I just thought, I don't want to play piano anymore. I want to be a sports guy. But then I came back to classical music through learning Beatles, sitting down at the piano at home and picking up the chords in Beatles songs and Who songs and things like that. And then I thought, I remember I used to be able to read music and play that kind of stuff, so it'd be fun to do that again. So I started taking lessons from a guy in town called Sid Helier, downtown at, I can't remember the name of the music store. It might have been Pearson Music at that time. He was an old guy from England who played the accordion, and he also played piano, and he would play around at a lot of restaurants around here and in Winston-Salem with a guy named Ray Guerrillo. He played clarinet with him. And Ray Guerrillo was the band director at UNCG, the jazz band. They brought him down here to have one of the first college jazz programs. It wasn't a major at that point. And when I graduated from high school, I started going to UNCG and was in the band with Ray. And so I took piano from Sid Healer for 2 years just to prepare to kind of to go to college as a music major, to learn how to read music again. So I kind of, at that time, I really was into classical more than anything else, learning how to play Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven sonatas, and then later on Brahms and Chopin. And then I kind of kept up the interest in jazz. They were kind of parallel markets. And I don't think I knew this at the time, but I think what drew me to it and what still draws me to it is the fact that you can produce a whole spectrum of frequencies just by yourself. You don't have to have a bass player because you can play the bass part with your left hand. You don't have to have a singer because you can play a melody, and then you don't have to have a guitar player. You get the whole thing right there. And so it's easy to hear a fully finished piece of music just on the piano, and you can do it yourself. So there's kind of a fun thing going on there about hearing the bass part and the chords and the melody and hearing how they all fit together. I guess is what drew me to the piano. I would pick it out. I'm not one of those persons, at least at that point, who when I heard something I could just instantly sit down and play it. I would have to work it out. Like try this note and then this chord. That sounds like the first chord, and then try to figure out what the second chord is from there. A lot of time it was trial and error. And then over time you figure out certain chord progressions that are normally used, and it makes it easier to guess. And then at some point, and some people literally can literally reproduce everything just with their ear. I'm not quite that person, but I have pretty good relative pitch, and I've worked over the years at developing my memory so that sometimes I'll hear something and I can sit down at the piano and play it back instantly. But usually I've got to do a little bit of figuring out. I know some people who can do that though. But they put their pants on 2 legs at a time, or 1 leg at a time also, just like me. Your social life revolved around practicing and hanging out with people in the music department. One of the funnest things was in the morning, they would have coffee and donuts out at this little room right when you come in the front of the music building. So one of the funnest things was just to go there in the morning and have coffee and talk with people, and then go practice. UNCG has an excellent music program. They always have, and they did back then, and they still do today. So it was pretty fairly high-level competition. It wasn't like Juilliard or anything like that, but you didn't show up not having practiced, you know. I mean, and there were other people waiting to fill your slot if you weren't very good. And it was the 1970s. What can I say? There was disco. Yeah, I actually only finished 2 years at that point, and then I quit.
So you had to work and everything.
Yeah, I quit to work, and for a variety of reasons, kind of gave up music for a while. Except I was playing in a church, and then after a while, I had a couple of kids, and got married, and had a job selling lawnmower parts, and then got really wasn't very good at that. I didn't sell them. I shipped them. I tried selling them, but I don't even know what they do. So I started figuring maybe a better life would be to play music. I remembered playing music back a few years ago. So I got back into it, reapplied, went back to UNCG, and finished up then and got my master's degree right after that, and just worked part-time jobs while I was doing that. I worked at UPS for a while. I worked at, did some paper routes, part-time jobs where you could practice. That was a pretty hard thing to find the right amount of time to practice to learn like a Beethoven sonata and a Chopin scherzo while I was working, like at UPS and raising kids and things like that. It's hard to. I found the time to practice, but lots of times, once you're in that situation, the focus is not like what it was before when I was 18. It was different, so I had to learn how to learn better how to focus with just a short amount of time. And actually, I'm still learning that today. But I was glad I went back, and I had a great time. I tried to do mostly classical music at that time, but I kept getting drawn into jazz, and so I'm probably more known as a jazz musician than a classical musician. A couple strategies I had were if it was music, printed music that I was trying to memorize, I would after I kind of got familiar with the piece, I would work it backwards. I would, like if there's 42 measures to it, I would concentrate on just memorizing the last 8 measures. And then the 8 measures, once I have that down, go back to the 8 measures before that, and then keep doing it that way. Because I read somewhere that if you do that, then you're working towards something. When you start at the beginning, then you're working towards something that you already know. You have the confidence that I already know what's coming up. And so you know the end of the piece just as well as the beginning of the piece. If you always start at the beginning piece and play to the end, practice like that, you're always going to know the beginning of the piece really, really well. But then if you're not disciplined enough to work on those other parts, you won't know those as well. Because if you play good enough, you can get through the piece, from beginning to end. Even if you don't know maybe one section of it as well as you should, you can kind of fumble your way through it. But to not have to fumble your way through it, you would have to isolate that part. And I found working backwards not only solved that problem, but it relieved a lot of the boredom that comes from practicing, is just doing something a different way. And so now when I practice, I try to look for those things, because when you're not bored, if you're just mindlessly running up and down the notes and mindlessly saying to yourself, if I do this enough times, I'll have it. You might get it after a while, but it's really no fun to do that. And actually you learn it better if you slow it down and take parts about it and like really get into the nitty gritty. Like, what finger should I use going from this note to that note? And then what does that mean about what happens right after that? And how do those 3 notes sound if I play them just by themselves together, even though that's not how they come? And what would that sound like in a different key? And you feel like at first when you do things like that you don't get as much done because you haven't played the whole piece from beginning to end over and over. That seems like it would accomplish more. And then a half hour has gone by and all you've worked on is just that one little measure with those few notes. But having spent the time working on those few notes and thinking about it like that, you actually will have accomplished more. So it's those kinds of things. So I'm kind of a person who kind of likes practice because I like to look at it that way. Because the problem is, and sometimes those that you get so involved in one little aspect of it that it leads you into something else. Like I might be working on a section like with these 3 notes that I keep talking about, and then I'll say to myself, it'd be neat to write a song based on those 3 notes the way I just played them. And then you go off and do that, and then you haven't accomplished the original task you went for. But that's a good thing. It's a good problem to have, because that's how you can accomplish a lot. Not only if that happened, not only would I have worked on that song a little bit, I would have started on another song. So I got into the habit of having 5 or 6 or 7 different things always going on at once, and keeping them all up, you know, realizing that I can always go back. If I get tired of working on number 6, I can go back to the 4th thing I'm working on and work on that a little bit, and put equal amounts of focused time tinkering with those. And over time, if you keep that up, you'll have a few of them finished, or one of them finished, and it'll sound pretty good. That's kind of my method now that I use, because time is limited. I mean, I guess soon, if I retire in a few years, time won't be that limited. But during the summer and Christmas vacations, when I have no classes to teach, I can do things like what I used to do when I was younger, put 4 hours a day into working on something. But during most of the rest of the time, it's only 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and the rest of it is you're either teaching or you're playing. So.
Now, are you going off of sheet music at this time, or are you?
Sometimes it's sheet music. Sometimes it's all improvised. The example I was given of practicing, I was talking about memorizing a piece of sheet music. But the same thing is true even if it's even if the piece is not written out. There's a memorization process, whether it's a Beatles song, a blues song, or a fully written out classical or jazz piece. There's still the idea of absorbing it, so you don't have to think, oh yeah, that song starts with this chord. You know, you know it so well that you don't even have to think about that anymore. So there's a process always, no matter what the style of music is, because you want, especially in the styles, in the improvised styles, you want to get, when you play, when you're at the place where you're playing in front of people or playing for whatever, you don't want to be thinking at that time about all those things that you focused on when you were practicing. You want to have those things you focused on, you will want to have focused on them so much that you don't have to think about them, but they still come out in your playing. You know, it's like being present in the moment is more important lots of times in an improvised piece. It's the most important thing in an improvised piece, being right there. But you won't have anything to say if you haven't spent time beforehand learning things to say. So the extreme focus is to help you get to the place where it's kind of coming out just because it can't help come out of you. You know, I can't help but play this chord and follow it by that chord because I've practiced that. Even though it may not be part of this song, I can put it in there and it comes out and it works out pretty good. Sometimes you don't know where that comes from, but it usually comes from those focused times of practice where you're developing to get to the place where it's just instinctual, you know.
That muscle memory comes into play.
Muscle memory, and I guess muscle memory is the best thing to call it. Which that's true in classical music too. Even if it's a memorized piece, that's the purpose of memorizing it, so that you get to the place where it's not a struggle to think what's coming next. You've done it so many times correctly that you know what's coming next, and you know you can easily execute it because you've done it so many times. Yeah, that was something I worked on. I'm not the world's best sight reader. I've become a pretty good sight reader. There are people who are a lot better than me because they've been doing it a long time, for the most part. But there are, I've picked up a few tips along the way, and sometimes if I have to, I can sight read okay. But it's a completely different, it's a different skill or a different part of the brain, I guess, involved in deciphering something that you're reading, then when someone says, let's play, There Will Never Be Another You, what the mind has to do is completely different things. With There Will Never Be Another You, which is a jazz song with chord changes, those are easily stored in your brain because after you've played it a few times, you've got those, and it becomes like your brain recognizes it as this is There Will Never Be Another You, and here's the chords, and you don't have to think at all. If you're sight reading, though, you're deciphering the symbols on the page, and there's that extra step that the mind has to go through, I guess. And if you're a really, really good sight reader, then you can play like I'm talking about. As you sight read, it comes out instinctively because you've read enough things, and there's nothing really on the page that surprises you. But most people, like me, can't quite do that when they sight read a piece. They've got to have played it a few times before they get that good on it. And then there's lots of music that doesn't even read at all. But what you need on the piano is not so much strength. You just need agility, the ability to move from one finger to another rapidly. And sometimes that's the mistake students make. They're using too much force. It doesn't take much force at all to make this piece of plastic, or ivory, it used to be, go from here down to there. I mean, how much force do you really need just to do that? Not much. So, but you do need the ability to go from one note to another, one finger to another, back and forth rapidly, either going down in your hand or up in your hand or skipping fingers and things like that. Now I did injure myself at one point and had to evaluate the whole apparatus, from the shoulders, the elbows, to the wrist, to the fingers, to the posture, how you're sitting when you play, where your feet are, all kinds of things like that. But mostly from the upper body, getting rid of stress so that you really are relaxed and are able to move freely around. Because what I was talking about before, the way of practicing where you keep doing things over and over again, human nature kind of gets in the way of that, because the human nature, as you continue to do something over and over again, especially if it's hard and you're trying to get it down, you tense up and your mind just can't help but try, if I just put more force in it, because you're a little frustrated and that's coming out. So you've got to learn to relax and play the notes with expending as little energy as possible. Play the notes without your wrist being locked up, So I spent a lot of time. I actually had to stop playing for about 10 weeks, not play at all, because my left hand was so injured. It wasn't just from playing the piano; it was from splitting firewood, which was a popular thing to do at the time to save energy costs. We had a wood burning stove, and the combination of practicing and then my wrist going down like that in a fixed manner. Yeah, it's close to tendinitis, but
It's overworked.
It was yeah, and the way I ended up getting better was there's this thing called myotherapy, M-Y-O therapy, myotherapy, which is similar to acupuncture, except that instead of using needles, they find the muscles that run from your shoulder down to your wrist, they find pressure points on them where it's kind of seized up. I guess there might be a little bit of chiropractic stuff involved in this too. But you just press on those real hard and then find another one. And you can find those spots. When you press it up here, you can feel it down there. So the therapist would find those spots and massage them. I mean, we'd start way up here on the neck and work down. It's a Swedish discipline, I think, and I think it's like a combination of what chiropractors do, what massage therapists do, and what acupuncture does. That's my remembrance of it. I may be totally describing it wrong. I had to do it for a while, and eventually got better. And then I've tried to figure out how to prevent that from happening again. So I kept doing the exercises that they would give me to do, with your shoulders. And then when you play, just consciously making sure you're relaxed, that's a hard thing to do. If you consciously tell yourself to relax, then the first instinct is to not relax. So it's like a mind over matter type of thing. And you see a lot of pianists, like one of my favorite pianists, Bill Evans, you see him playing hunched over like that. And I get like that sometimes too. And I'm sure other pianists, we all probably have some things that we're not doing that's probably not the best for us. But in general, I'm sure even when Bill Evans was hunched over like that, he wasn't tense. He was just hunched over so much because he was just getting into the music and his body was just going with it. But you have to think about it, and everyone is different. But in general, you want to make sure you're sitting up straight with your feet on the floor. Because especially on the piano, you want to be able to go from this end up to that end easily. And so you find whatever position works best to do that over time. But if you don't ever think about it, something will happen to you like happened to me, and then you'll start thinking about it. I mean, it happens to a lot of pianists. A very famous classical pianist, Leon Fleischer, famously had to stop playing. I think he completely lost the use of one of his hands. I can't remember if it was the right or left hand. And he kept teaching during that time. And he's lots of pianists. There's several pianists who that's their claim to fame. They know how to teach people to not be tense when they play. While they're playing, observing them and telling them what your shoulders are tensed up. So then you come up with exercises for the shoulders that you can do, and then you work with them as they're playing to fix that. It's different with everybody. It might be shoulders with somebody. It might be excessive lifting of the fingers with someone. Basically, my philosophy is you don't need to lift fingers when you're playing the piano. You need to get your hand to where the notes are and then just press the keys down. If you have to lift and then press, that's two acts. It's better just to think of one thing, just press instead of lift and press. There's sometimes where you do want to lift because it gives you some extra color, extra strength that you need, or you lift so it's easier for your mind to remember what the finger sequence is. But if you have too much of that, and if you're doing it the wrong way, it can really tighten up the hand. The creativity. I went to see some friends of mine who were just doing a little jazz gig at a local restaurant at that time. And there are people I knew, people like Scott Adair and Greg Heislip, and there was a singer, Chris Morrell, who had just a couple of years ago passed away. A really good singer who went on to sing with the Count Basie band. So this must have been the early 80s. I went to see them, and I thought to myself, not in an egotistical way, but I thought, I could do that. I could be doing that, and I'm not. Why am I not doing that? So, yeah, I really got to the place where I missed it, and I don't know why I stopped it. Sometimes when you're young, you just make stupid decisions, or maybe not stupid decisions, but decisions that could have been thought out a little more, I had kept playing in my own way. I had stopped working on classical music, but I kept playing, kept learning, kept chords in my mind and things like that, and songs. So that's one of the instances that I felt compelled me at that time, convinced me that yeah, I really miss this and I'd like to do it. And I thought the same thing about teaching. I remembered back to when I'd been in theory at UNCG. I had this really great, I thought he was a great teacher. Some people thought he was kind of eccentric. Art Hunkins was a teacher in a couple of classes I was taking, these theoretical type classes. And he would say things like he would write a chord progression or some excerpt of music on the board, and he would say, now this chord is followed by that chord, and notice what the soprano voice does there. And he played it, and then he said, this produces this type of feeling or whatever, and then he would write a big question mark on the board, and he said, your role is to always ask why. Why does this chord progression produce that certain feeling, whatever it was he was talking about? Anyway, I remembered him giving lectures like that, and I also thought when I remembered that, I thought to myself, I could do that too. You know, I can stand in front of students and talk about music and explain what's going on with chords because I understand it, and at least I thought I did. You know, that was my ego kicking in a little bit. It turns out teaching is actually pretty difficult. So, but both those things, the playing part and the teaching part, so I decided to go back to school. And
what was it about teaching that you found difficult?
I think it's the same thing as I was talking about playing. If a teacher who has whatever is going to be taught for that day, if they know that material so well, they can then stand in front of students and talk in a free manner about it. They can approach it from several different angles because they know it so well. They can handle any question that anybody asks because they know it so well. But if at the beginning, like what I would do lots of times, I would be teaching courses that I hadn't really had that much training in, like music appreciation. And even music theory. I had taken a lot of music theory, but I'd never taken any theory pedagogical courses. So you study the material for the lesson coming up, and then you get to class and you find you really don't know it as well as you thought you did, and you find yourself looking in the book to answer something that someone asked you that you should really just be able to say, no, that's not like this. So I had to get some experience teaching also. Yeah, the Dave Fox Group was started when I was getting into the idea of free improvisation, which I became attracted to from reading a variety of things. I read about this guy named Butch Morris in New York City who led a group of people just with hand signals. They would have no music composed ahead of time, but he would just point to people and give them hand signals, and they would make up music on the spot like that. Of course, I had always been into improvised music from the jazz side of it, but the idea of free improvisation, that of course, that wasn't really free. That's kind of structured improvisation. But then there's also free improvisation, where you just get together with people and just start playing, and whatever happens, happens. There had been some things I had heard like that in my lifetime before, like Chick Corea, for instance. When I got into him, he was into free improvisation for a while. He did some things with Anthony Braxton, and one of the first albums I had was an album of his that was like that. And like most everybody else, it was the 1969 and 1970, so it was the age of psychedelic. So weird things like free improv, quote unquote weird things, were attractive to a lot of people my age because they kind of had that Grateful Dead-ishness part to it, just jamming. and doing whatever comes to your mind. And so I started meeting some people who were really into that type of stuff, like Eugene Chadbourne, who lives right here in Greensboro. And I was just really attracted to the idea of just playing music. Don't have anything planned out in advance, and I still like to do that, and it's still a good thing to do.
Almost like a jam session, if you will.
Like a jam session, and but at a jam session, you usually say, "Well, let's do this song," and everybody comes up and you play on it and stuff. But in free improv, you don't even do that. You don't even say anything. You just start playing, and it could be anything, and the other guys, girls pick up on what you're doing, and you communicate with each other. And of course, as a pianist, you can do that. You can make up a song and have bass, chords, and melody and everything like what I was talking about. And I also like the idea of taking ideas from free improvisation and using that as a way of practicing. Like thinking of something, I would like to be able to do such and such a move, and then so you practice that move on the piano. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. Or the idea of just let your hands drop on the piano, and then keep those notes held out and ask yourself, what is that chord? You know, is it an E, 7, sharp 5? Is it some weird mixture of chords that don't usually go together? So I like the idea of applying that to just regular practice as a musician at the piano. And the Dave Fox group was kind of an outgrowth of all those ideas I was thinking about at that time. The first Dave Fox group was myself, a drummer named Ian McDowell. No, not Ian McDowell. Sorry, I can't remember his last name now. And Dave Ministres on bass, and Michael Collins on guitar. And I played electric keyboard, we had electric guitar, bass, and drums. And we did sort of structured improvisation. We would write songs that had maybe just a melody, just a fragment of a melody. And then we just play that melody, and then we go off and do whatever, we kind of jam, and then come back and do that melody again. So there's a whole spectrum of how do you create music. You can have, on the one side, completely free, just make everything up right on the spot. And on the other side, everything is completely worked out. Everybody knows exactly what to play. They got their music in front of them with the notes, and nothing is given to chance at all. And then in the middle somewhere, you've got things like jazz and blues and rock that have songs with the melodies and chord progressions, and you keep repeating those over and over again. And then somewhere between that and completely free is the idea of structured improvisation, where a composer gives a framework for musicians to think about while they play, but he doesn't tell them exactly what to play. Like, give them a series of notes. Here's 8 notes. Play those any way that you want to, and in the order that you want to. And then when I point to you, go to this next section, and there the measure might read, play one note as soft as you can, just things like that, structured improvisation. So Dave Fox group was kind of like that, and it was a fun thing to do, and we received a little bit of attention, and it helped me. It helped. I don't know if it rekindled, but it really put in me the idea that I like to compose my own things to play in addition to just playing. I began to think of myself as more of a composer, or as just as much of a composer as a musician as a result of doing that. Because if you compose a structured improvisational piece, you have to be really concerned. It's not just do this or do that and do that. It's you think of things that will produce hopefully a certain effect that you're after, and think of a structure. What kind of structure can I give people to think about so that they'll just doing it completely on their own will get some sort of desired effect that I'm looking for. So, you know, composition is organization, really. It's taking sounds and organizing them in a certain way. So I've started to study in my own way, what is the organizational process involved in composition? And that would be a lot of my, I learned what is that organizational process, I think, from being free, from playing free improvisation. It made me think about organization. Because when you go to a free improv session, somebody has to start something. Somebody has to play a note, somebody has to play a chord, and then you get going. So it makes you think, what makes a good start to something? And then after somebody does that initial first thing, either they have to do something else, or you've got to do something else to answer them. So what makes that a good something else to follow that very first thing? And it started making me think about that. And I don't have all the answers to it, but that's what composition is. It's how do I organize what follows what in a logical way. If you want it to be logical, it doesn't have to be logical. I'm doing a lot of trio work these days, so it's me, a bass player, and a drummer, or me, a saxophonist and a bass, or me, a guitar and a bass. So there's only 3 people there, so you can listen, you can take your choice. You can focus on what's the bass player doing now, and I'll go off of that. Or what's the drummer doing now, I'll go off of that. Or both of them. With 2 people, with only 2 other people, it's not hard to listen to both of them at the same time. When you're in a big band with 16 people, it's kind of hard to do that. Who to know, who do you listen to? And it's harder to play as a unit. When the bigger the group is, it's harder to play as a unit unless things are written out and you practice them. You can still work like a unit. I don't mean it's harder to play as a unit. It's easier to improvise as a unit the smaller the group is. It's easier to communicate the smaller the group is. Like sometimes I'm doing this great gig now at a place in Winston-Salem called Tate's. A friend of mine, Matt Kendrick, has had a Tuesday night. It used to be a jam session, and now it's just we just play, but people still show up, and it's really still kind of a jam session in one sense. But the drummer, Kasim Williams, the other night, and this is a real small room, small corner of the room where we're in. So I'm playing an upright piano that's against the wall. I'm facing the wall, and the drummer is behind me over here. And so is the bass player, for that matter. So I found myself the other day, at times listening to the drummer, Kasim, either listening to his ride cymbal, the steadiness of it, or listen to his hi-hat, just listening to things he would do. And he is also listening to me. He's not only listening, he's looking at it, because he can see my hands, and lots of drummers like to do this. They'll look what the piano player is doing with their hands, and they'll start accenting with them. And then I'm listening to things he's doing, and I'm hearing him go with me, and it's a pretty cool thing. But then at other times, I'm listening to what the bass player is doing. And if you're playing by yourself, of course, you're listening sometimes to the right hand. What's the right hand doing? And then what am I going to do it's like both hands are listening to each other. Foxmore Chronicles. That was myself and Eugene Chadbourne. It was recorded at Finch Chapel right here at Greensboro College. I think the whole album is from that concert. I did a series of concerts with Eugene Chadbourne, which were a whole lot of fun. Even went to France and did some with them over there. And Dave Doyle went with us, who works at More Music and is a really good free improv player. So we had this concert. I played a few solo piano pieces, and Eugene played a few banjo pieces on that. I played guitar also. And then we did a composition I'd written, a structured improvisation composition I'd written just for that concert, a sonata for banjo and piano. And in it, I wrote things that a lot of the movements had me plucking the strings of the piano, this kind of sound there.
Like you're playing a guitar.
Doing different, yeah, and that, because that goes real well with what the banjo does, because the banjo is plucking these strings. So we had a lot of plucking going on. And that album got actually reviewed by Downbeat, which was pretty cool. They gave it a good review too. It's funny, sometimes you say, yeah, that album got a lot of reviews, but that doesn't mean they were good reviews. There could have been some bad reviews. But this was a good review. And Eugene, I learned a lot about these ideas I've been talking about improvisation and compositional organization. I learned a lot of that from playing with people like especially with people like Eugene Chadwick. Well, I have purposely, and still do, although now I'm playing mostly jazz, but I have tried to always, to me, one of the things that made my involvement with music so fun was being able, or getting the opportunity to do different styles of music. So I've tried to be equally good no matter what style I'm playing. I tried not to be, like if I played in a blues band, I tried not to sound like a jazz musician who happens to be in a blues band. You know, play like Chick Corea in this blues band. I tried not to do that. I tried to, what does a real blues pianist do? What does if I'm in a funk band, what would a real funky keyboard player do? So I do like to play different styles, and that means different people, different circles of people doing different things. So I kind of go in and out of what, depend on what my interest is at that time. The album, The Meldavians, well, this is Meldavian piano literature,
okay.
yeah. So the album, The Meldavians, is myself, Melissa Reeves, who's a vocalist and fantastic vocalist and improvising guitarist. Scott Sawyer, great guitarist from Raleigh. And on the album, Dan Davis played drums and Damon Brown played bass. And a couple songs, a couple other people. Joey Barnes played drums on one or two of the songs on it. And I think Matt Kendrick also played bass on it. So that the Meldavians album, Farewell Arigamon, and I'll get you a copy that you can show, was my kind of rock album. It was a little bit jazzy, but mostly rock. I wrote most of the songs on it, and there was a couple of extended improvisational songs on it. And I was writing mainly for the singer, Melissa Reeves, her style of singing and her voice. We did lots together at that time, and still hopefully we'll play together sometime soon. And that was really, really well received, and I spent a lot of time on that, producing it. It was more of there was lots of improvisation on it, but it was mostly like a typical rock album production, where you spend a lot of time in post-production. You get the rhythm tracks done, and then you add the vocals later and all that all that kind of thing, which takes up a lot of time. But we took the time to do it right, and that group had a lot of success. But it's hard to keep that group together because Scott lives in Raleigh, Melissa now lives in Arizona half the year, and then she's back here in North Carolina. And for a variety of reasons, after a while, it became hard to keep doing concerts with it because we would have to rehearse because it had been so long since we played and stuff like that. So when we do play now, we do play occasionally, and I do have another album getting ready to come out with them. But when we do play, we'll do a few songs from that album, and then the rest of the show will be whatever we want to put together at the time. We'll get together the day before and put a show together. And as I go on in years, that seems to be the best way. If I want to do a concert with whoever, 3 or 4 people, call them up, say, let's book this hall, we'll do this date, and then we'll get together at some time and figure out what to do. Between the 3 or 4 of us, we should be able to put something together. It'd be nice to have the time to practice day in and day out for 3 weeks and then put the show together. Or it'd be nice to have the luxury of going on the road and playing in a place night after night, doing the same show over and over again to get that show developed. But it's hard to do that when you have other responsibilities and things. But we do the best we can. But I went on from there to create the idea of Meldavians. Became some of the songs on the album were we kind of invented this place called Meldavia, which is a land on another planet, Tyrannus. And so lots of the projects I do now fall under the auspices of Meldavia, such as Meldavian piano literature. I have a YouTube show. I've filmed 5 episodes of it, which is called. It's a review of Meldavian music, basically. There's another group I have called the Draves, which is a 4-piece quartet with myself, Ian Pasquini, Chip Newton, and Roger Kors. And they're kind of a instrumental vocalist version of the Meldavians. We do that same type of stuff, but with no vocals. And of course, the Draves come from Meldavia also. There's a desert, the Drave Desert in Meldavia, which borders the northern country of Arigamon. So you have to know about the geography of Meldavia to understand that. But that's, and if you're, on my website, I'm trying to be the place to go to learn anything about Meldavia. So if you want to know about Meldavia, you can go to my website. Yeah, the Healing Blues Project. A professor here at Greensboro College, who used to be at Greensboro College, Ted Efremoff, had the original idea of doing something to help the homeless population through blues musicians, because as he says, he said to himself one day, who knows more about, he said, homelessness is about suffering. Who knows more about suffering than blues musicians? So we paired up in the original album, we paired up blues musicians, songwriters, with a homeless person at a resource center in Greensboro called the IRC. And they would meet this homeless person, talk to him, get their story, maybe meet sometimes, several times. And then they'd write a song together. The inspiration for the song would have come from what this person talked to them about. And we were produced the album, The Healing Blues, and sold that, had a concert here at Greensboro College, which was real successful, and raised money for the IRC. And then we did another album right after that. And then Ted moved away to Connecticut, so we haven't done much since then. But that was a fun project because I had different musicians come in and different bands come in and do different songs on one album. I had some great great players. All the good blues musicians and rock musicians in Greensboro, a lot of the rock musicians. Sam Frazier is on it. Mark Buddy Rowe Harrison. Chuck Cotton played drums on a lot of them. We even got Bob Margolin to come and do a song on it, and he did the concert with us too. And can you believe I left Bob Margolin's name off of the off of the credits? I was so careful compiling because there's a huge amount of people playing on it. I left it. Maybe that makes this album worth a lot of money to collectors one day, but his name is not on it. The gigs are starting to come back now that the pandemic is over. So I've got a regular gig with the Matt Kendrick Trio at Tate's that I mentioned. Hopefully the O. Henry Hotel is going to start offering jazz again. For the past before the pandemic hit, for 7 years, Neil Clegg, a colleague of mine here, and Matt Kendrick were the house trio at the O. Henry Hotel in their lobby. And every Thursday we would have a different singer. And we're doing the jazz repertoire, the Great American Songbook, songs from the 50s, 60s, and just whatever the singers could do. And that was a great gig. I met a lot of people. Lots of people would come out regularly to that. People from out of town staying at the hotel would come down, and it's a really nice venue because of the room that it's in, the historic O. Henry Hotel with all the nice furniture they have there. It's like sitting in New York City at the Algonquin in the 50s or something like that, a lot of people say. Matter of fact, I think that was Dennis Quainton's original idea, to kind of replicate what the Algonquin Hotel was like. That's supposed to come back, so that I'm looking forward to doing gigs like that. I'm going down to Raleigh tonight and play.
Thursdays? You still do, or is
That'll be Thursdays, but right now we don't know exactly when it's going to start back. At least I think it's going to be Thursdays. It's mostly jazz that I'm doing right now. That's what I'm concentrating on, and that's what most of these gigs will be. And I hope I can keep doing it, till I'm 90.